Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and in this one, we've got a lot of ground to cover. We're going to be talking about a big event that Marvel Comics did back in the day called the House of M. And then we're going to talk about what we did in our game, which was kind of the opposite of the House of M. And then we are going to talk about the Scarlet Witch and her primary superpower, which is called probability control. And it's the ability to make impossible things happen, right? And in our game, we connect the idea that every time the Scarlet Witch does that, if she gets a bad roll, she is, her critical failures basically cause something that we call the Mandela effect, which is kind of making the rounds on the internet these days. A lot of people have maybe heard about it because of, how do you spell the Berenstein Bears or Berenstein Bears or Berenstain Bears or whatever. And different people have different opinions on all that. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because I have a brain tumor. I have an inoperable brain tumor, and I have had some people ask me about that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, not too long, but it causes me, one of my symptoms is I will mess up my own continuity a little bit, right? I'll be inconsistent. If you've been following the channel long enough, you've probably picked up on that by now, right? And at any rate, so we are blaming those inconsistencies on the Mandela effect, which in turn we are blaming on the Scarlet Witch, uh, and characters like her, other characters with that same power. So before we get into all of that, make sure you smash that like button. Check to see if you're still subscribed because YouTube loves to unsubscribe you without telling you. And then leave us a comment. That helps us out on our end with the YouTube algorithm. But more importantly, we just love hearing from you guys. We've got an awesome community here, and it's all thanks to you. So thank you so much for being here. So, having said all that, let's get into this one. So, we'll start with the brain tumor. I've told the story before, but it's been a little while, and we've got, more subscribers and stuff now. And so, it seems like kind of a good time. And part of it takes place during the holiday season. So, it seems vaguely topical to me. At any rate, one day, many years ago, I slipped on some ice. I took a pretty bad fall, cracked my head on the stairs outside of my house, which were covered in snow and ice and stuff. That's why I slipped on them. Went to the emergency room and they did an I always confuse MRIs and CAT scans. I get both all the time and I can never remember which one's which, but they put me in what I call the big donut and they scanned my head and they found this brain tumor. And in your brain, there's this part of the brain, and I hear different doctors pronounce it differently. But pineal gland, it's as in pine cone, because it's shaped like a little pine cone. And it is actually the very, very, very center of your brain. And having dealt with this particular part of the body for years and years and years now, um, I don't think anybody knows what it does. Ancient cultures actually thought that's where your soul was. And I had one doctor, it's a very interesting experience. He was from India. And so my understanding, super nice guy, by the way. He was like really, really short. He was like 3 feet tall and always wore Hawaiian shirts. And he put me in mind of a hobbit. And we became friends, and so I would call him Dr. Hobbit or I'd call him the Hawaiian Hobbit or whatever. He loved it. He thought it was awesome. So, but Dr. Hobbit kind of led me to believe that in his home culture or whatever you call it, the pineal gland has like a lot of spiritual significance or whatever. And so he was like, "Do you have psychic powers?" And I don't think he was joking. I think he was totally serious. And I was like, "No, should I?" And I was like, "Are you messing with me?" And I think he felt self-conscious and he was like, "Maybe." And then like we both laughed, but it was like, I guess you had to be there, but it was a weird experience. But at any rate, so the point is, so your pineal gland is about the size of a raisin, and it's in the very, very, very center of your brain. So my tumor is about the size of a grape, and it sits on top of the pineal gland. And if you were to stand over me and look straight down in the top of my head, underneath the pineal gland is this junction of three major, I don't know if the word would be artery or vein or whatever, but there's these three things that blood is supposed to go through. And in my case, the tumor, which again is the size of a grape, it is reaching down over top of all that with like roots, and it strangles all of that stuff, and it keeps the blood from passing through like it should. And so then blood is not getting to other parts of my brain like it should. And it causes me no end of symptoms. And one of the big things that it does is memory loss, right? On a bad day, I might wake up and it's almost like having amnesia. And there was one day about a month ago, I could not remember my name. So that so far takes the record for like the worst I've ever had. Or there was one time I was in a grocery store and I had three kids and the youngest passed away. And in that moment, I had forgotten that. And I thought I'd misplaced my child. And I was going to managers and asking for help finding my kid, and they're like, "What's your kid's name?" And I'm like, "I can't remember." And that was all the brain tumor, right? So the reason I mention all that is because sometimes when I'm running the game, I will say something like, whatever, you guys go fight a villain, and his name is Dark Star, and he wears a black costume with purple trim, and he does such and such a thing. And then the following Saturday or whatever, we will play the game, and I will describe Dark Star as wearing a black costume with green trim. And this is what he does this week. And sometimes the players don't notice, and other times they're like, "I thought it was purple." And I either in that moment have no idea, or I might be utterly and completely convinced that it had always been green. And I never said anything other than green. So actually, one of the reasons I have a YouTube page is I listen to my own adventures. Sometimes I completely forget a thing and I listen to the relevant video so that I know what's going on, on the days where I'm less good. And there's like a spectrum of like clarity, where I have my good days and my bad days. The great irony is when I was younger, when I was in elementary school, and I'm not making this up, I'm dead serious. At one point, my nickname was the Human Encyclopedia, and I practically had a photographic memory. So it's very ironic that this has happened to me, of all people. I used to be very good at I had memorized the name of every comic book character and every, action figure name and da 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 da. And that's not the case anymore. But so at any rate, the reason I mentioned this, especially that thing where I will be convinced that the thing was always green, even though a week earlier I said it was purple, right? I mentioned that because that's very, very similar to this idea called the Mandela effect. And maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. Um, like for me, I will tell a quick story. I think it's entertaining. I don't know. Hopefully you're entertained. I have a really, really, really vivid memory of going to a theme park not too far away from where I live called Cedar Point. And this would have been the late 80s. And we had a really bad drought that year. So I don't know. This is like 88 or 89 or something like that. And it was so hot. I feel like here in Ohio, I feel like a hot summer day is like in the 90s, right? This summer, though, this day at Cedar Point, I mean, it was over 100 degrees. Uh, it was awful. And like that year, everybody's yard was just brown and you weren't allowed to water your grass. There was a ban on using sprinklers and stuff like that. And it was just a brutal hot summer. So me and my mom went to Cedar Point and had been walking around doing the whole thing. And we're walking like out of the theme park to go out to the parking lot. And we're walking up to the what do they call them? Turnbuckles, right? And at any rate, as we're getting ready to leave through those things, turnstiles. I don't know, whatever. Hopefully, you know what I mean. As we're getting ready to leave, though, I remember my mom turns to me and she says, "You know what sucks? We're only halfway there." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "Remember when we parked? We had to park like way out because I think everybody had the same idea was they wanted to go on water rides and stuff like that to like cool down." And I was like, "Oh no, like we're only halfway there," because like I felt I was just gonna fall over and die. So we just stopped walking for a minute, and mom looks around and she looks over to our left, and there was this little I don't know what you'd call it, like a fun house. And Cedar Point had licensed the uh the Berenstain Bears franchise, right? And so my mom sees that and she turns to me and she says, "Hey, do you care about the Berenstain Bears?" And I said, "Not really. I'm like 13 now or whatever, like I don't never was my thing. I was a Transformers G.I. Joe kind of guy, right? I don't care about these guys." And so she's like, "Well, the reason I ask is because they probably have air conditioning." And I was like, "Oh, well, hell, let's go." So we go over and we sit down in there. And I don't know, they've got standees or something. It's like you must be this tall or stuff along those lines, right? For whatever this attraction was supposed to be. We weren't doing the thing. It's just they had benches right inside the door and they had air conditioning. So we just sat there on a bench. And I remember this hot college chick comes over to the cash register and she's like, "Hey, can I help you guys?" And I said, actually, we just were hoping to soak up some air conditioning if it's all right. And she's like, "Oh yeah, no problem. I hear you. It sucks out there." And she's like, "Yeah, stay as long as you want or whatever." And she kind of walked off to the side and was talking to a boy or whatever. And so I don't know, mom says something else about the Berenstein Bears. And I was like, "Why are you saying it like that?" And she's like, "What do you mean?" I was like, why are you not saying Berenstein?" And she was like, "Why are you saying Berenstein?" I was like, "Because it's spelled like Frankenstein." And she's like, "Okay." And I was like, "Why are you saying Berenstein?" And she says, "Because it's like Goldstein," because she worked in finance and she knew a lot of guys where their last name was kind of spelled like that, but it was pronounced Steen. So that's what she was used to. But I remember having this not argument, but this back and forth with her. And so finally I flagged down the hot chick, and I was like, "Hey, can I ask you something?" And she's like, "Sure." And I said, "So we were just talking about is it Berenstein or is it Berenstein?" And she's like, "You know what? We get that all the time and we have no idea, man. We just work here. They don't tell us anything." And I was like, "Okay, cool." I remember that so vividly, right? So if you look it up now, the correct spelling is stain, Stain. And if you if you have an old storybook or something in an old toy box in your attic or whatever, if you go look at this thing from the 80s, mind you, and I don't mean new stuff, I mean the stuff in the 80s, it probably says Berenstain, right? And so that's the Mandela effect is people like I would bet my life on the fact that me and my mom had that conversation. And I don't have any idea why we would be arguing about it or whatever if it was spelled stain. First of all, I wouldn't have thought of Frankenstein if it was spelled stain. Same with her argument. There would not have been a discussion. We would have both read it as stain. There's no spin on that, right? But my point is, I would bet my life. Like if you put a gun to my head and asked me if that really happened, I'd be like, yeah, of course it happened. I remember that as clearly as any other memory of mine. So now here's the thing though, right? Is so I'm the worst guy in the world to talk to about this stuff because my brain tumor messes me up. And sometimes that's how my brain tumor works. Is I am just completely convinced of a certain thing, right? So for sure, there are a lot of people who believe the Mandela effect exists somehow. The question is, what is it, right? So, for instance, there's a lot of people who are skeptical and they think it's something, as I understand it, kind of akin to like mass hysteria, which, if you forget about the Mandela effect for a minute, I think the concept of mass hysteria is very interesting. And there's been a lot of weird stuff through history. Like there was this thing one time called the dancing plague. Google it. Check that out if you've never heard of it. But it's like there was a little town somewhere way back when, and everybody like danced themselves to death. And so then the question is like, what was that? And one of the things that I've heard is that it was supposedly a case of mass hysteria, right? So mass hysteria is interesting. I know nothing about it. I don't know if that's the case or not. I've always been one of those guys that I've always watched videos about, I don't know, man, like UFO sightings. I like there used to be a TV show called Sightings. I loved that show back in the day. Anytime it was anything just that was not the same old crap, like I get so tired of mundane stuff about, the day-to-day drudgery of real life. So if I saw something about Bigfoot or the Loch Ness monster or whatever, Mothman, I was always watching that stuff. I think that stuff is really entertaining. Before anybody flips out on me, I'm not saying whether any of it is real or fake, or I'm not doing that. I'm just saying it's entertaining, right? So I think the Mandela effect is really interesting, really entertaining. And for sure, something's going on because people are having the experience. The question is, what is it? So I saw this one video where a guy suggested it was time travel. He thought that we have not invented time machines yet. Like I'm going to use Back to the Future as my example, right? Imagine if you lived at the halfway point between 1955 and 1985. What would that be? 1970? So let's say somebody like a coworker or something of George McFly, let's say they were living in the year 1970. From his point of view, time travel has not yet been invented because Doc Brown invents it in 1985 or whatever, right? But when Marty McFly goes back to 1955 and he changes stuff so that now George McFly is a famous author, right? Well, this guy living in 1970, imagine if he noticed the change. And he's like, I thought George McFly worked with Biff and had a crappy job and da 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 and was a total loser. And now all of a sudden he's a famous author. What the heck? So some people think that's what the Mandela effect is, and that time travel has not been invented yet, but it will be one day, and they go back in time and da 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 da. I don't know what I think of that. I'm certainly not like, yup, that's what's happening. Um, I think it's interesting. I think it would make a good role-playing game. That's usually how I take most of these things, is I just mine them for ideas for the game. So that said, with the Mandela effect, I was like, you know what? Since I keep screwing stuff up on my end as a game master, this seems like a really good opportunity for me to say this is what's going on. So if I have any inconsistencies on my end whatsoever, we say it's the Mandela effect. And then so as the game master, I have to say, well, what is the Mandela effect? Is it CERN doing a thing with its particle collider? Are they sending tachyon particles faster than light back in time? And all it takes is a particle for you to get a butterfly effect? Or is it like, is there some Doctor Strange villain, or whatever, using sorcery to make these changes to the world and the whole thing is magical in nature? What is it? I decided it was when somebody with the probability control power rolls a critical failure. And I ripped off part of the idea from GURPS Supers. I can't remember where it is in GURPS now. They have I think it's called nuisance effect. And so the idea is like, for instance, with Nightcrawler, when Nightcrawler teleports, there's this puff of sort of, it's either reddish smoke or pink smoke or whatever. I think sometimes in the comics they use pink to represent red because, like, Cyclops has a red visor. When he shoots lasers, I think they're supposed to be red, but oftentimes they draw it as a pink beam, and I think it's because it's transparent red. Does that make sense? So I think that when Nightcrawler teleports, the fact it smells like brimstone, he looks like a demon, kind of, right? And then it smells like brimstone. I always felt like they were trying to remind you of hell, especially when later they were like making him a priest and stuff. That's juxtaposition on their part. Uh, so I assume it's supposed to be red, but at any rate, let's just call it red smoke for the sake of argument. That would be the nuisance effect in the GURP sense, is you would give him the teleportation power, and the nuisance effect would be he makes a puff of red smoke and it smells like brimstone and so on and so forth. Whereas most people, when they teleport, it's nothing happens. They're just gone and then they reappear over there and there's no bad smell, for instance. But then nuisance effect could apply to anything. And I remember in the book, they say something like your power, and it could be anything. It could be like mind reading or something. But every time you do it, it like turns the grass yellow, or it makes your neighborhood smell like lemons, or it's just random crap. And so I think I kind of had that in my mind and was like, what if we were also doing it to kind of make fun of comics, how they keep changing stuff, where like in the comics, Jimmy Olsen like has red hair, and then you get to like the Supergirl TV show or something, and he has black hair or whatever. I was kind of lampooning that sort of a thing by saying it was actually the someone used probability control and they rolled a critical failure. So instead of doing what you're trying to do, like let's say you're fighting a water guy like Hydra Man. Let's say it's Scarlet Witch is fighting Hydra Man and she wants his water to freeze, but she rolls double ones. We say, well, his water doesn't freeze, but now he's a woman, and he always has been, because you've completely rewritten reality, because that's what she does now. It used to be more toned down. It used to kind of be limited to stuff that kind of could happen. Like, sometimes a bridge will collapse. There was actually one in my town that collapsed 10 years ago or something. Um, and she just accelerates it. So this is the day it happens, and the guy who was standing on it then is buried, the sentinel or whatever is buried under the rubble and blah, blah, blah. You get it. That's the way her powers used to be. Now, the way it reads to me is she can just do anything. I think at this point she is just Q from Star Trek, pretty much. She's just in God mode. Um, so yeah, we said that anytime a character with probability control fails, it it has the nuisance effect of changing reality. And so sometimes we play it up again to make fun of silly stuff that comic book creators do or TV showrunners or whatever, you know. Um, Sometimes we do it though to explain away something that I have done with the continuity that was a mistake, you know. Um, I said there were two bank robbers, but then once you get them in the paddy wagon and a week goes by before we play the game again, now there's three guys tied up in there, you know. Kind of blame it on the Scarlet Witch. So, that explains, I think, the Mandela effect, the probability control. Oh, and then the Scarlet Witch. Man, I love the Scarlet Witch. I have always loved the Scarlet Witch. And I don't just mean I enjoy her character or I like how she was written in classic Marvel comics. I'm just going to put all my cards on the table. I had such a crush on her from day one. I remember the very first time I ever saw her. My good friend, my best friend back in the day, Jay, he had the Marvel Superheroes role-playing game, and I loved their character sheets because the sheet was like two-thirds ish picture of the character, full size, full length picture of whoever the character was, and it was sometimes it was kind of art made just for the game, but more often it was from a specific issue where they kind of removed background and then, you know, pasted it onto this character sheet. And they had a lot of really good artists from back in the day, like John Byrne. I want to say John Byrne did the art of the Scarlet Witch, and I've always loved his art. I think he knows how to draw a woman, you know. And of course, the old outfit, I sort of hate the new costumes they give her, but the classic bit there is kind of like what Wonder Woman wears. What would you call it? Like the bodice and trunks or whatever, you know, but it was that and then like the thigh-high red boots and the opera gloves and you know the boot and glove length varied. And throw a red cape on there and then the I don't even know what you'd call the thing on her headpiece, I guess. Um, but I just remember seeing that and being like, wow. Like I didn't know anything about her yet. I just liked the design. And on that character sheet, the you know, the suit is red, and then depending on which version you go with, either either there is no pink and it's just skin tone. I think that was what was intended with the character. Because I really do think, you know, at the end of the day, sex sells. They wanted her to be a very sexy, almost like a Jessica Rabbit type chick in a way, I think, in my humble opinion. And so I think she was supposed to be showing a lot of skin. Um, and so as a kid, that's the ideal age to be seeing this, you know what I mean, in terms of they know their target demographic, you know what I mean? I was just like, heck yeah. Like this is awesome. And I remember flipping through those character sheets and I'd be like, we're setting this one aside. And then I did the same thing with like the White Queen, who again is wearing like a little white bodice, little white trunks or whatever, pretty much just wearing lingerie, really, right? There were quite a few Marvel heroines back in the day that fell into that category. And I remember making photocopies of the character sheets, and then I remember coloring them in like every possible repaint that you could think of, you know. And with Scarlet Witch, I made one where the suit was blue and two-tone, kind of like how sometimes the suit is red and pink. I did the same thing, but it was like medium blue and light blue. And I think with that one, I gave her hair kind of like the old school way they did Wonder Woman's hair, where it looked kind of blue. I think I did that. And then I did a yellow version of her with blonde hair. You know, you get the idea. I did a bunch of, I think I did a green version with brown hair. I know the hair doesn't match on that one, but I wanted kind of all the colors. But yeah, I was a huge fan of the Scarlet Witch. And anytime I saw an Avengers comic book, if she was not in the team roster, I just felt like it wasn't the Avengers to me at that point. But if she was, I was, maybe two times or four times more likely to buy that issue. Always been a fan. And I'd never seen her be a villain in the 80s or the 90s or. And I know she was originally in the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, but they did this whole redemption story arc, and that was before my time. I didn't see the villainous stuff. I only ever saw her as a hero. And so in our game, we were really pushing the idea of her being not only a hero, but honestly, I tried to make her seem nicer than most around her were. You know, I made our Scarlet Witch be just a real sweetheart. And and so then in Marvel Comics, because I'll go there first. She had kids with the Vision, which I think was kind of a bad call in a way, but whatever. Um, and then she didn't, and then she was upset, and then they decided to make her a villain, and I didn't like that. I didn't like that one bit, you know. And so I already knew. I'm like, we are not doing that. Like at this point, I'd given up on comics, and I was just like, you know what? Screw those guys. Which, by the way, was another reason we were playing a villain campaign, was because a lot of people were writing comics at the time where I did not like them. And I've gotten to meet a lot of people through stuff like Twitter, and I do. I think the comic book industry. Well, I won't go there. There's a lot of people that I have problems with. I'll leave it at that. And so when they are writing the heroes, in my opinion, the heroes start to act like douchebags. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, we were kind of railing against that with our whole villain thing. And then we hated that we had done the villain thing. As a brief aside, when I owned my comic book store, because we had said stuff had gotten really high tech in the game world, because we ran the Brainiac 13 adventure where he uses nanotechnology to kind of upgrade all the technology in the world, make everything futuristic. And so part of that was in my comic book store, we sold some Warhammer stuff, and we had something called an Eldar Grav tank, which was a very futuristic tank that could hover instead of having tank treads. And I just thought these things were like really, really cool looking. So when I liquidated the store, for whatever reason, the Warhammer stuff just didn't sell. Nobody wanted it. And which is funny because now Warhammer around here where I live anyway sells like hotcakes. People can't get enough of it. Back then it hadn't really hit yet. So I was left with all these Eldar Grav tank models. And so to make a long story short, I had spray painted them red, like glossy red, like a Ferrari. And then we painted the canopies black, and like it looked good. I know that's not how you're normally supposed to paint miniatures, but because of some of the other stuff we were using, like part of the time we were using Transformers action figures on the gaming table. And so if you shaded a miniature the way you were supposed to, it looked wrong next to a Transformer. So we were trying to kind of match the look of the Transformers. And at any rate, these grab tanks looked really, really good. And then when we did our whole villain thing, I painted them all purple. And all the stuff that had been like glowing blue circuits now were glowing green circuits. And I still have those, and I kind of hate it. And when we try to paint them red, it just doesn't look right because that purple's coming through the red too much. And it's a long story, but At any rate, we really regretted the whole villain era. Me being stuck with all these purple tanks is kind of symbolic of that regret in a way. And so we knew we wanted to undo it. And we were like, well, how do we undo it? And then we thought of the Scarlet Witch. So the irony is in House of M, the world is pretty much normal. And then she changes the entire world. We're now, and I haven't read it for ages, so I might be a little off. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But she makes it so that her dad, Magneto, is like an emperor or something. And so that makes her and her brother Quicksilver are like the prince and princess now in this story. So it's a this whole big thing about their royal family. And then the M in House of M, depending on how you look at it, either stands for Magneto or Maximoff, but at any rate, their family though, you know. And so that runs its course. As I recall, they said when everything else changed, Wolverine actually remembered who he was. And it was some kind of nonsensical crap about him having amnesia. Meant he was like immune to reality manipulation. I didn't like that at all. But the heroes rail against this until everything gets changed back. And then Wanda goes off to do more villain things after that, you know. And I hated it. I hated everything about it. So in our game, we did the opposite, which was the world was not normal, right? We'd been running a villain campaign and the Lochnar was here and it was corrupting John Redbridge, who at this point is Wanda's husband. And like we kind of did this story with Dagger too. And shout out to Dave Eckelberger for coming up with this spin on things. I think it's the right way to go. He was saying, like in the case of Dagger, John Redbridge had basically seduced her. She loved John Redbridge, but he said, you know, just because you love somebody doesn't mean you necessarily agree with every little thing they do. And so he thought that the most loving thing Dagger could do is try to purify him with her powers. And she did. She made him good. And that was in the 80s. And then years later, you know, when the Lochnar comes into play, the Lochnar's doing the opposite. It's making him bad. And so again, we said, you know, Wanda would love him and she would not want him to be bad. And like I said, we made our Wanda kind of more ethical or moral or pure or whatever you want to call it than most of the people around her. So with all this going on, she was just kind of sad. And so Wanda, and also the way we treat probability control is kind of like making a wish. And so what we find out is for a while now, Wanda has been wishing that things were more like they used to be. And that is the operative phrase, because honestly, this is sort of a huge moment in our game that's going to forever change the game world. She's using that reality warping ability of hers, saying, I wish it was like it used to be. And so it happens. And then one day everybody wakes up and all of the stuff that Brainiac 13 had assimilated is back to normal. And all of these countries that were under the control of Redbridge are back to normal, right? So on and so forth. And then the final part of that is, well, this is hard to explain. So they have this thing in the DC Heroes game called the Source. It's in the comics too, but I feel like the Source in the game is a little different. I feel like it's almost its own continuity in a way. The stats that they give the Source in third edition DC Heroes are dexterity 75, strength 75, body 75, Intelligence 75, willpower 75, mind 75, influence 75, aura 75, spirit 75. And then they give it, I want to say it's 100. I don't have it in front of me because I'm going by memory. I think it's 100 APs of recall, 75 APs of precognition, and 50 APs of omnipower. And so we had used that as kind of a template for Redbridge because in the game, that is supposed to be literally where all superpowers come from, right? And so our reasoning behind that was then whether we're talking about the Infinity Gauntlet or whatever we're talking about, that's what his stats are going to look like at this point in the timeline, right? Actually, we upped it because we thought that was kind of like post-crisis stuff. And like if you look at the first edition Legion of Superheroes source book, they have a guy in there. I want to say his name is Power Lad, and then his alter ego is something like Jed Rykane. They give him some massive strength. I can't even remember what it is now, but it's like a three-digit number, right? It's like this huge, huge, huge strength, stronger than anybody else in DC Heroes at all. And I mean, by leaps and bounds. It's not even close. So we had come up with the idea that the Omni power needs to be high enough for that guy to exist, right? So we did. We came up with the pre-crisis version of the source, and I can't remember now if we doubled the numbers or quadrupled the numbers or whatever. It kind of doesn't matter because it's still going to be a multiple of the third edition stats. And so at any rate, the idea we came up with was what if John Redbridge subbed all of that omni power for the split power? Because what we had done, the reason one, I mean, it's a multifaceted sort of thing. One of the reasons for the really big Uber character sheet was he had done all this stuff. He'd been adventuring for years and years and years and years. At one point, his character sheet was like 20 pages long. It was ridiculous. And I hated keeping track of all that stuff. You know, I had kids at this point. I was wanting a more streamlined experience that was less work on my end. I didn't want to be doing math all day. I wanted to be spending time with my family instead. So that was one of the reasons for this big super sheet. You know what I mean? Well, so we came up with this idea though. We're like, wait, what if he just subs his omni power for the split power? Because part of what Wanda did when she said, I wished it was like it used to be, she's sort of resetting his morality to the way it was before the Lochnar came around. And by the way, after she reset everything, the Lochnar is just suddenly not around anymore. Right. And, you know, we had said his eyes had changed from blue to green, that he had these glowing green eyes that was supposed to invoke the look of the Lochnar. Now his eyes were glowing blue again, like the Optimus Prime, glowing blue eyes. And so now that he was good, you know, it's like from his point of view, you wake up one day with this harem and you feel like you're not being fair to them. Like, you know, one of your wives wants to spend the day with you. Let's say it's Christmas, right? She wants to spend Christmas with you. Maybe you have kids with that wife. You just spend the day with that one. You ignore everybody else. You know what I mean? So he's seeing the downside of all this and hates it. He hates the situation he's in. He wants to try to do the right thing, but he's dug such a deep hole. And I feel like sometimes I relate to that, honestly. Not, you know, obviously not with multiple wives, but other aspects of my life where I'll just make bad decisions and then I have to live with them, you know, accountability. So yeah, now even though he's good, he's struggling with the accountability of his past mistakes. And so he comes up with this thing of for so long now he's been acquiring power and really being pretty much an insufferable Mary Sue. And so finally he says, what if I sub the Omni power for the split power? And so now what you get, we really liked. So he splits into an army of guys, and one of them then looks like this: Dex 25, Strength 25, Body 25, Intelligence 25, Will 25, Mind 25, Influence 25, Aura 25, Spirit 25. And now, if I remember correctly, it is Recall 50, which still just means he's got a really good memory. Kind of needs one for as old as he is, just to be able to remember his own life. Um, Now he's got precognition of 25, which is only, if I remember correctly, it's only, I think, 4 hours. I think he can see 4 hours into the future. And then the little guys, when they're weaker, then have no omni power at this point because all the omni power got spent on them turning into this army of guys. So the trade-off is no, I'm no longer in God mode where I can just do anything I want. Doesn't really make for good gaming anyway. But now it is, but I can be in lots of places at once. And now all these harem girls get their own husband, And so then on Christmas, say, they all get their own house and normal family type stuff. And like I said before, we were in this dark age of the game before. We're going to come out of it. This is it, right? This is coming out of all that and getting a more normal kind of a situation. Um, Trying to think if there's anything I'm leaving out there. Oh, the precognition. Something really cool happened with the precognition. This is a yet another shout out to Dave Eckelberger. I remember telling him we were playing the Marvel superheroes role playing game at one point, and I rolled up a guy. We did that a lot where we would just feel like playing, and so we'd order a pizza or something, get out the Ultimate Powers book, roll up a guy at random, and whatever you rolled at random, you just had to do it. You had to play a game as that guy, and a lot of them were no good. A lot of them sucked. And then every once in a while, you got kind of that diamond in the rough that was like the awesome character. So we did this one night, and I rolled up a guy with precognition. And I was like, man, can I make up a different guy? And he's like, no, man, you know the rules. You got to play what you got. I said, well, here's the thing. You gave me the one power in the book that's impossible to use. Nobody can have precognition. And Dave was like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, let's say you're playing precognition in my game. And so you ask me, because this is kind of how it works in group supers. You say, I use my precognition to see what my teammates are going to do next round. How do I, as the game master, have any idea what the players are going to do next round? I said, I can't answer the question. And if I can't answer the question, the power is useless. It does nothing. So this is the worst power in the book. And so Dave's like, I hear you. Like that's a valid concern. I hear you. And he's like, well, and I forget what it is. Let's go get the Taco Bell or let's go pick up the pizza or whatever, and I'll think about it. And he did. And we did, ran around for a little while. We came back and he's like, okay, I got this. And he's like, so just forget about precognition for a minute. Just play your character. I'm like, okay. And we do whatever it's like I'm on a superhero team with whoever the other random heroes are. We learn that a bank is being robbed, so we go to the location, and one of the bank robbers shoots one of my teammates. And he's like, the gun goes off and it's like it's moving in slow motion. And I was like, am I not moving in slow motion? He goes, nah, you're moving in slow motion too, but this is for dramatic effect. So you see the bullet sort of go into your teammate's face and it's just awful. And I was like, oh no. And he's like, but then time stops. And now it's rewinding. And you see the bullet come out of the face and the wound shuts and it goes back into the gun. And you guys move backwards back to your headquarters where you get the call that the bank is being robbed, and now you're in normal time again, but you know what you know now. And I said, "Oh, that's genius." And he's like, "So what do you do?" And I was like, "Well, first thing I do before we go there or whatever is I tell everybody what I just saw." And so then you've changed time. And now the person who was going to die before puts on a helmet or they wait in the van or whatever, right? And then you just play the scenario again. And if something goes bad, you can rewind up to an amount of time equal to what's on your character sheet, which for all the John Redbridges now is 4 hours. They can, it's like the one quote unquote power that they have now is to rewind time 4 hours. So that was kind of cool. It was not a power I normally played. Usually I always did the Superman type characters with like flight and heat vision and stuff. Now they couldn't do that, but they could do this other thing instead. And I thought that was pretty neat. I really liked that actually. So that from here on for a really long time, we did it that way and I liked it. And it was cool too for certain characters, like one of the Red Bridges before had been a Green Lantern. He got his Green Lantern ring back and had a willpower 25, so that worked, you know. He made a good Green Lantern, and then he's an example of one that could fly and shoot energy blasts, so you know, it worked out. But yeah, uh that was kind of what we did instead of House of M, which like I said, they started with normal and then they did kind of a royalty thing. In our game, we've been doing a royalty thing and we ended normal. And oh, the other thing I should say, when Wanda was saying, I wish things were like they used to be, what we start seeing is, for instance, in the last video I uploaded, the art I used for that was American Dream from the Spider Girl comics facing off against Morgan Stark, who was the daughter of Tony Stark, right? So part of this spell or whatever you want to call it that Wanda has done, her probability control thing, is so when Morgan has a son, she names him Tony. When American Dream has a son, and by the way, in our continuity, she's the son of, or excuse me, she's the daughter of Steve Rogers and Sharon Carter. So when she has a son, she names him Steve. And so what we see now, and like I said, this is the early 2000s, right? So in the modern day, and I don't mean the early 2000s, I mean like 2024, 2025, stuff like that. Now we have a guy named Iron Man whose secret identity is now Tony Stark II. And now we have a guy named Captain America whose secret identity is Steve Rogers II. And they are the grandkids of the original Iron Man and the original Steve Rogers. And then that was our way of having really recognizable characters in our game world in the modern day, despite the fact we had not done comic book time. We'd done real time, you know. So we can thank Wanda for that. Wanda kind of restores the world. And at the end of the day, Wanda becomes one of our most important heroes ever in the grand scheme of things. So I wish they would do something like that with her in, you know, the movies and the newer comics and everything. And yeah, I it's just not my what they've done with her is not really my cup of tea. Although I kind of liked WandaVision. I'm a sucker for sitcoms. I love old sitcoms. Um, I thought WandaVision had a lot of really cool stuff going on. I still would have liked a more happy ending. And I do think it's kind of nonsensical that she seems to have the ability to create these characters and then she's mad they're gone. So maybe let me know if I missed something on the show, but it seems to me like, why don't you just make them again? Like it got to that Doctor Strange movie. What was that one called? Multiverse of Madness. And she's like, I want my kids. And I'm like, so, well, first of all, if you can go to other universes, go to one where like Scarlet Witch got hit by a car, right? And then like just get those kids. I felt like that movie was written by a moron. But even beyond that, it's just like, well, yeah, but you made the kids um in WandaVision, like you you can do this at will, right? Just do it at will again. I don't know. Like I said, maybe I'm missing something. If so, if I'm missing something, tell me in the comments. Also, are you a fan of Wanda? And I would love to talk about classic old school Wanda, the way she was in like the 80s and the 70s and stuff like that. I sure was. Man, I love Wanda. Um, or whatever. If you want to talk about House of M or the Mandela effect, I'd be cool. I'd like to talk about that. I would love to hear if somebody has uh those kinds of stories. I love it when people have stories of like they saw a UFO once or whatever their childhood home was haunted or something. I eat that stuff up, man. But yeah, leave a comment. Make sure you're still subscribed. Smash the like button. You know the drill, right? And from everybody here at the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we hope you guys have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.